This video is a response to your first essays. In addition, I'm going to say some things about Puritanism and Pilgrims. I will probably do these videos every week, and this one is probably going to be a little long because there's several things to say, but they won't be as long in the future as this one. A couple of things about your first essays. Make certain that your essays are labeled by your last name, first name, and whatever the discussion board happens to be. I won't be able to know whose essay I'm returning if you use a generic name. All of the writing assignments will be some sort of analysis. I will never ask you to just summarize something because this is a writing course and we are achieving the writing through literature and it requires analysis. Overall, the first responses were well done. There was a bit too much summary in some of them. You have to use details from the source to prove your points, but you never just summarize. The prompt this week asks you to examine the religious overtones of a historical document. Obviously, there are religious overtones because William Bradford mentions God in almost every paragraph. As a matter of fact, God or godly is mentioned 39 times. In the entire work, God is mentioned over 400 times. So it should have been apparent that I wanted you to do more than just tell me that religion was present, because that's kind of obvious. What I wanted you to do, and what I was expecting you to do, was to read and view the material on Puritanism and apply it to Bradford's history. Why didn't I just say that? I wanted you to figure that out. It was a test to see if you would make that connection, and many of you did a beautiful job of that. Remember, every assignment is to see that you have read the materials or looked at the videos under the web links. And while I'm thinking about this, and I didn't write this down, when you respond to others, I'd like for it to be a substantive response. I don't want it to be, I agree with you. You need to read the response, indicate by the summary that you've read it, and then bring something to the discussion. Now some comments about Puritans and Puritanism, as well as the Pilgrims. They are basically the same in the sense that they have similar religious beliefs. The Puritans wanted to purify the church and the Pilgrims wanted to separate, but more about that in just a minute. Puritanism is the strongest influence on American literature and American history. The things that we take for granted in American culture, like religious freedom and separation of church and state, and that should be state, have their origins in Puritanism. The Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England and the Pilgrims wanted to separate from the church. However, both groups had similar religious beliefs inspired by John Calvin and Martin Luther. As you probably remember, Martin Luther in Germany began the Protestant Reformation against the Catholic Church. He felt that the church actually got in the way of a personal relationship with God, that the individual did not have to rely on a priest or a pope to know God. The individual could read the Bible, which was just beginning to be printed. John Calvin in France picked up on these same ideas. The handout that is most important in understanding the Puritan beliefs is the one under the web links tab called Puritanism and the Colonial Period. What the Puritans and Pilgrims believed. Here are the basic beliefs of the Puritans and Pilgrims. Puritans and Pilgrims believe, number one, in the total depravity of the individual because of the fall of Adam. Number two, that God elected or saved only certain individuals and no one knew who it was. However, human nature being what it is, people assume that if they were doing well, that they were among the chosen. This led to seeing God's hand in everything. If I fell ill, it's because of God. If I fell into sin, it's because of Satan. Point 3, there was limited atonement, that Jesus died for the chosen, not everyone. Point 4, they believed in irresistible grace. God's grace was freely given. It could not be earned or denied. Either you had it or you didn't. Point 5, finally, they believed in the perseverance of the saints. Those elected at the full power to interpret the will of God. It should be those who were elected. You could see how this could be easily abused, and it was. You will see the ugly side of these beliefs with the extremism of the Salem witchcraft trials. Now, you might think about Christianity today. This humans are seen as fallen because of the Garden of Eden. However, today people can profess their belief in Jesus Christ and be saved. That's completely different from the way it was with Puritanism, a slight change. And with Puritanism, you didn't know whether you were the elected, but you assumed you were, and you acted accordingly. The Puritans also believed in a plain style. Nothing could or should come between the believer and God. Not vestments, statues, stained glass windows, and Catholicism had all of this. And thus the conflict between Protestantism / Puritanism and Catholicism. They wanted a plain style. They didn't want anything to get between them and their relationship with God. We see these beliefs in William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation. The Puritans, Pilgrims saw themselves as a chosen people, just as the Jews in the Bible saw themselves as a chosen people. Just as the Jews had a great exodus from Egypt, the Pilgrims saw a parallel with their departure from England. They saw the New World as a new Eden. We could have an entire semester just talking about the history of religion. We could have an entire semester just talking about Christianity. So, as you might imagine, we're just able to touch the tip of the iceberg, to use a cliche. And you need to know something about the Bible. You need to know something about Christianity, and I'm sure many of you do, to understand their beliefs. There is no need to recount the endless references to God and His hand in the actions of the settlers. You did an excellent job of that in your essays. I will just give one example from chapter 9 where Bradford describes the obnoxious young man on the boat. Bradford writes, "There was a sailor who would curse and swear most bitterly, but it pleased God before they came half seas over to smite this young man with a grievous disease, of which he died in a desperate manner, and so was himself the first that was thrown overboard." End quote. Bradford is interpreting here, and this is typical Puritanism. They see the hands of God in everything. But this is subject to interpretation. Just to look at the other side of the issue, how does Bradford know that that was God punishing that sailor? The sailor may have had a problem. The sailor may have just had an illness and died. But they're attributing it to God punishing him, and this was typical Puritanism. Admittedly, even though they had a hard life, many scholars argue that it was because of their faith that gave them the strength to survive. The Pilgrims, I'm editing as I go, I apologize. The Pilgrims were serious and strict, but they were not without joy. They felt that they were following the example of Christ. Religion is the foundation of the United States, but the Pilgrims had no intention of founding a national religion. To do so would go contrary to what they were trying to escape in the first place. Almost immediately, there were splinter groups led by Roger Williams and Ann Hutchinson. More people arrived, and they did not share the same beliefs, so things began to dissipate. The original settlers soon faded away. With the advent of the 18th century, there was a strong interest in reason and scientific discovery. The founders of the country still believed in God, but they were called deists. But they were less inclined to attribute everything that happened to His intervention. But religion will still play a part in the history of the United States with the writing of the Constitution. Even today, we are still debating some of these issues. For example, whether the Ten Commandments should be displayed, whether God should be mentioned in the Pledge of Allegiance. All these videos will not be this long, but I need to establish some complex themes at the very beginning of the course. Thanks for listening.